If you'd met me a few years ago, I'd have just said I was a small farmer on the edge of Cedar Hollow, a guy named Eli Morgan trying to keep my grandfather's dream alive. 6 acres of tomatoes, hens, and stubborn hope. Grandpa Samuel Morgan handed me that deed with his old, cracked hands and told me, "Make something beautiful that lasts," and I took that like a promise. I had 15 hens with ridiculous personalities, 2 mischievous goats, a worn red barn, and evenings where fireflies drifted over the fields while his old brass compass sat on my windowsill, like he was still watching over the place. It wasn't just land, it was my legacy, my peace. Then Silver Ridge Meadows rolled in next door, all towering houses, sharp angles, and perfectly trimmed lawns, like a glossy brochure dropped onto real dirt. My weathered barn and wild vegetable rows turned into the eyesore at the edge of the community. For a while, we managed polite nods and distant waves, until Victoria Halstead arrived. She stepped out of a spotless white SUV in pressed white pants and a silk blouse, looked straight at my coop and said, "Is that your rooster making that horrible racket at 5 a.m.? No hello, no neighborly smile, just instant complaint." I tried to be decent. I explained this was a working farm, that roosters crow, hens cluck, goats bleat, and that my land had been here long before the subdivision sign went up. Her mouth only tightened. That's when she told me she sat on the Silver Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association board, and that unsightly farm activity and strong odors weren't compatible with community standards. I laughed it off on the outside, but something cold settled in my gut. The letters started soon after. Official Silver Ridge Meadows logo on top, violations listed inside, unapproved fencing, excessive poultry, improperly stored equipment. They threatened fines I technically didn't know, because my property wasn't even inside their subdivision, but paper can wear you down. Neighbors stopped waving. One woman stopped buying my eggs. Only Rachel Alvarez, 3 houses down from Victoria, still leaned on my fence at sunset and tried to reassure me. "Don't take it too personal," Rachel said one evening, her golden retriever at her feet. "Victoria is showing pictures of your place at HOA meetings, calling it a health hazard and an eyesore, says you're killing property values. And she's been talking about getting the boundaries redrawn. Her husband's got friends on the zoning board." That night, I dug out Grandpa Samuel's old survey, my finger tracing the curve of Maple Run Creek, his handwritten note. "The creek is the line." I told myself the law would protect me. I told myself people like her couldn't just move lines because they didn't like the view. Then my mother's health collapsed. The doctor said she needed help now, not later. I had to be 3 hours away for 2 weeks. I asked my buddy Javier Ruiz to watch the animals, installed a couple of cheap security cameras, and even called the Redstone County Sheriff's Office to log my concerns about trespassers from the subdivision. As I loaded my truck, I glanced at Victoria's open garage. A neat row of red gas cans gleamed in the morning light. A shiver ran down my back, but my mom needed me more than my fear did. 2 weeks later, turning onto my gravel lane, the smell hit me first, thick, chemical-tinged smoke that clawed at my throat. The sky ahead was a smeared gray. I pushed the truck as hard as it would go, whispering no, 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 like a useless prayer. Then I saw what was left. My garden was scorched earth, my chicken coop a black skeleton, my red barn a collapsed mound of twisted metal and ash. The place where Queenie, Misty, Ginger, and the goats lived was gone. My house stood untouched at the edge of the property, like the fire had carefully skipped around it just to make sure I'd have a front row seat to the ruin. I was still on my knees in the ashes when a pristine white SUV rolled up. Victoria Halstead stepped out, immaculate as ever, with a balding man in a suit carrying a leather folder. "Well," she said, looking almost satisfied, "looks like the farm problem has been taken care of." "This is my life," I choked out. "What do you mean taken care of?" The man introduced himself as Martin Crowley, president of the Silver Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association. Calm as a banker, he said the HOA had authorized action after repeated violations and no response to notices, and that they had remedied the situation to protect property values. "I was caring for my sick mother," I snapped. "And I'm not in your subdivision." "Actually," Victoria purred, "the county rezoned last month. Your little farm is now part of Silver Ridge Meadows. You're under our rules. Bylaw 47B, 3 unanswered notices. We have the right to act." I felt sick. Then I saw it. A metal survey marker, half buried by the old fence line, untouched, right where Maple Run Creek curved. The same marker Grandpa Samuel had shown me. You burned down my farm on land you had no right to touch, I said quietly. And you think this is over? You're going to regret this. For the first time, her smile flickered. The next 3 days were a blur of grief, coffee, and paper. I dug through Redstone County zoning records, spread them across my kitchen table with my original survey and that fat folder of HOA letters. On one county map, a thick black line marked the new boundary, and there was Maple Run Creek, clearly labeled as a natural limit. Everything east of it was excluded from the rezoning. My coop, my barn, my garden, all east of the creek. I called the Redstone County Recorder's office. A woman named Paula Green confirmed it. The rezoning specifically stopped at Maple Run Creek. Within minutes, she emailed me the signed maps. The HOA had zero authority over the land they'd burned. I took everything to the Redstone County Sheriff's Office and filed a report: illegal destruction of property, criminal trespass, animal cruelty. The deputy's expression went from bored to serious in about 10 seconds. That evening, I drove to the Silver Ridge Meadows Community Center. HOA meeting night. About 30 homeowners sat in rows facing the board table where Victoria, Martin, and 3 other members sat like royalty. This is a private meeting. Victoria snapped when she saw me. As a property owner affected by your decisions, I have a right to be here, I said, and walked straight to the front. And what I have to say can't wait. I turned to the room. Did any of you know your HOA burned down a farm it had no legal authority to touch, and that some of you might be personally liable for the damages? Silence. Air conditioner hum. Shifting chairs. That's not true. Victoria shot back, cheeks flushing. His land was rezoned. We acted within our rights. We followed the rules. I laid the county map and my old survey on a chair for everyone to see. The official rezoning stops at Maple Run Creek. Everything east of that creek, my coop, my barn, my garden, was never in Silver Ridge Meadows. You had no jurisdiction. Murmurs rose. A man in a blue polo stepped up to study the maps. I pulled out a crude hand-drawn boundary sketch with Victoria's signature at the bottom. This, I said, isn't an official document. It's a fake line someone used instead of the real one. Rachel Alvarez stood up. Martin, she demanded, did you verify the boundaries before you let this happen? Of course he did, Victoria barked. That farm was disgusting. Noise, smell, clutter. It was dragging us all down. We were protecting our investments. Property values don't outrank the law, I said. And just so you know, I've already filed a police report. You can't prove we did anything, she hissed. I pulled up a clip on my phone, footage from my driveway camera. Date and timestamp. A truck with Silver Ridge Meadows HOA on the door, pulling up to my gate 3 days after I left town. Contractors heading onto my property. I've got more, I said. And there are reporters very interested in how an HOA set fire to a farm beyond its jurisdiction. That's when the room snapped. I move we immediately suspend any board members involved, Rachel said. Second, the guy in the blue polo called out. Voices exploded. Accusations, defenses, questions. Martin tried to calm them. Victoria yelled about ungrateful neighbors. I gathered my papers and headed for the door. This isn't over, I told her quietly as I passed. But this time, it won't be my life in ashes. By the next day, it wasn't just the neighborhood that knew. Local news crews stood in my ruins. Cameras pointed at the charred skeleton of my coop. Social media lit up. Someone started a fundraiser. Within hours, people I'd never met had donated thousands. My cousin, attorney Claire Bowen, arrived with a legal pad and that we are absolutely suing them into the ground look. They torched land they had no right to touch, Claire said, circling Maple Run Creek on the map. We're going after the HOA, Martin Crowley, and Victoria Halstead personally. The sheriff served lawsuit papers that afternoon. I watched from my window as Victoria screamed at the deputy in her perfect front yard. That night, my neighbor Nate Wheeler called. His security cameras catch part of my property line. He sent me a clip from the morning of the fire, Victoria's white SUV pulling up near my fence at dawn. She gets out, carrying what looks very much like a gas can, walks off toward my land. I didn't think anything of it until I heard, Nate said. I already sent it to the sheriff. Later, Martin knocked on my door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The board wants to settle, he said. $50,000 to rebuild. If this goes to trial, some homeowners could lose their houses. My attorney says this is worth 10 times that, I replied. And that's before criminal charges. He swallowed. We only approved clearing your coop and compost. We hired professionals. They followed protocol. But Victoria kept saying they were too slow. She left, came back, excited. The fire started half an hour later. I'm not saying she started it, but the contractors didn't. The next morning, somebody slipped a note under my door. Check the pond behind Victoria's house. No name. No explanation. My investigator, Darren Cole, and I walked the edge of the ornamental pond behind Victoria's place. Neatly landscaped rocks, pretty reeds, and 2 empty red gas cans half hidden in the tall grass. Don't touch them, Darren said, snapping photos before calling the Redstone County Sheriff's Office. By afternoon, police were all over Silver Ridge Meadows. They carried evidence bags out of Victoria's garage, her house, her SUV. She stood in her driveway, screaming about conspiracies and witch hunts while her neighbors watched from a safe distance, suddenly unsure of the queen they'd been bowing to. At the same time, the HOA was imploding. Board members resigned. Lawyers scrambled. For the first time, people in that development started asking how they'd let one woman's hate and fear turn into this much power. Out here on my side of the creek, something very different was happening. Vendors from the local farmers market showed up with seedlings. A contractor who saw my story offered to rebuild my coop for free. Rachel came by with a casserole and apology in her eyes. We were scared of her, she admitted. The letters, the fines, the gossip. But we should have stood up sooner. One night, my cameras caught Victoria herself sneaking onto my land, leaving a half-empty bottle of lighter fluid near the burned area. By dawn, officers were at her door again. I watched the news as they led her away in cuffs. The caption said it all. HOA board member arrested on suspicion of arson. A few days later, Martin returned with another folder. There's something you need to see, he said. Inside was a glossy expansion plan. Neat rows of future houses drawn right over my tomato, rose, and chicken coop. One name was listed as silent partner, Victoria Halstead. In the end, the Silver Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association collapsed under lawsuits, resignations, and public anger. Victoria traded her spotless SUV and perfect lawn for lawyers and charges. With Claire pushing hard, I got real compensation, enough to rebuild properly, and then some. But what mattered more was what happened in the dirt. We put up new posts together. Me, Javier, Rachel, strangers who'd become neighbors again. We built a new coop. We planted fresh seedlings in soil that had seen too much heat. Every time I look at Maple Run Creek and that little metal marker beside it, I hear Grandpa Samuel's voice. The creek is the line. Nature doesn't lie. The smoke smell still lingers some mornings, and sometimes I swear I hear my old hens clucking in the wind. But I'm not just the guy whose farm got burned anymore. I'm the guy who refused to let someone else rewrite my lines for profit. So here's what I keep thinking, and what I'll leave with you. When community rules turn into weapons, when people like Victoria hide greed behind the word standards, and everyone else looks away because it's easier, who's really guilty? Just the one holding the match, or everyone who watched the smoke and decided not to ask where the fire started?